I've seen weddings fall apart over budgets, timelines, weather, and last-minute disasters. But nothing prepared me for the month when 4 different mothers decided they had a right to the same sacred territory. The couple's honeymoon suite. In Charleston, I turned a quiet hallway corner only to find a socialite already inside the suite before the bride had ever stepped foot in it, her luggage unpacked, her perfume in the air, and her confidence fueled by the money she used as leverage. In Lake Tahoe, the night began with tears. The bride sat trembling in a hotel robe while her mother-in-law staged a full photo shoot inside the suite, directing the photographer like she was launching her own personal brand. In Miami, the warning came from hotel security, a woman insisting she owned the room. And when I arrived, it was clear she meant it because to her, paying for the wedding meant owning every inch of the couple's privacy. And in New York City, I found something far more unsettling. A mother asleep on the honeymoon suite sofa, as if guarding her adult son's future, claiming she was protecting the family legacy, even if it meant suffocating the marriage before it began. For weddings, for families, for women who blurred the line between love and possession, tradition and surveillance, support and domination, and all of them chose the same place to wage their quiet war. The first room a new marriage is supposed to call its own. I was halfway down the honeymoon corridor of the Charleston waterfront resort when I heard the unmistakable click of a suitcase wheel scraping against marble. It was subtle, almost polite. The kind of sound you hear in luxury spaces where people whisper their chaos instead of announcing it. At first, I assumed it belonged to a housekeeper or a late-arriving guest. But as I approached Amelia and Daniel's suite, the one they had talked about for months, the one they budgeted down to the exact cent of their investment, I saw a figure already standing inside the doorway, not beside it, not near it, inside. She had her back to me, elegant posture framed against the warm lighting, designer luggage stacked neatly beside her as if she were checking into a penthouse she had owned for years. And she acted so comfortably in that space that for a moment my brain tried to convince me I was witnessing something normal. Except nothing about a mother-in-law entering a honeymoon suite before the bride had even stepped inside could ever be normal. My first thought wasn't even shock, it was calculation, because this particular woman had just paid over half of the wedding budget, and she wielded those deposit schedules like royal decrees. She specialized in fake generosity, the kind that sparkles in public but cuts quietly in private. The couple had warned me, gently, in that way couples often do when they still believe optimism can override a lifetime of family dynamics. They mentioned she had opinions about everything: the cost of the dress, the cost of the venue, the cost of the flowers, the cost of the marriage itself, if I'm being honest. But even with all those warnings, I didn't expect to see her physically inside the honeymoon suite before the wedding night had even begun. She turned toward me slowly, offering a smile so polished it almost hid the audacity behind it. Almost her eyes carried that particular glint I've seen so many times in women accustomed to power, the type who believe money buys not just influence, but entry into private moments that should never be shared. "Oh, Emily," she said, waving a dismissive hand as if catching me mid-errand. "I'm just making sure everything is up to standard." Up to standard. A phrase that can mean anything and nothing at once. I stepped further into the hallway, measuring the situation. When you've done my job long enough, you learn to read a room even when you're standing just outside its threshold. Her luggage wasn't casually placed, it was positioned with the confidence of someone setting roots. And she didn't look guilty or apologetic. She looked entitled, almost proud, as though entering this private space was an act of care rather than control. I remember thinking, is she truly planning to stay here? Because every instinct in me said yes. The staff had already whispered about her throughout the day, how she'd marched across the property with the authority of someone who believed her contributions granted her unlimited access. She had questioned the floral crew, critiqued the catering layout, and insisted that her family's social image required certain standards. standards that always seemed to cost more than the original plan. And yet, she framed it all as generosity, as if she were bestowing blessings upon a couple too naive to understand what luxury should look like. But now, seeing her inside the honeymoon suite, I felt something shift. There's a moment at every wedding where you can feel the fault line beneath the family dynamic begin to tremble, signaling that something deeper, something more dangerous is about to surface. For Amelia and Daniel, this was that moment. I cleared my throat lightly, not wanting to escalate things before I understood how far she intended to go. "They'll be arriving soon," I told her, my voice even they're excited to settle in. She didn't flinch. "Oh, I won't be long," she replied calmly. "I just needed to verify the arrangements." After all, I did handle the booking. And right there it was the shift in tone, the subtle reminder that she had paid for this suite. Not the couple, not the groom, not even partially. She had footed the entire bill for this luxury room, which meant in her mind it belonged to her as much as it belonged to them, or perhaps more. If you've ever watched someone disguise control as generosity, you know that voice, the softened, syrupy tone hiding steel beneath it. I've encountered it enough times to know what it means. I paid for this, therefore I own it. I watched her trace her fingers along the marble counter, inspecting details that had nothing to do with her, and a strange silence settled between us, one that wasn't awkward but deliberate, like she was daring me to challenge her presence. And I wondered, for a split second, how many times in her life people had been too intimidated to confront her. Probably too many. As she surveyed the room as if appraising a property acquisition, a thought crossed my mind, a quiet, instinctive question I've learned to trust over the years. Where does someone like this draw the line? Because from the moment she stepped into that room, I could feel it. She wasn't just breaking a boundary. She didn't believe the boundary existed in the first place. Honestly, I was speechless. Would you have expected anything like this? And yet, something told me this wasn't the final shock of the night. Far from it. The first time I met Amelia, she showed me her dress with the kind of quiet pride brides often try to hide, as if happiness might look like extravagance. It wasn't even an expensive gown, by Charleston luxury standards beautiful classic. Fitted with delicate beading that looked like champagne bubbles caught in fabric. But she lowered her voice when she mentioned the cost, almost apologizing for investing in something that reminded her she deserved to feel beautiful. I remember thinking, if a bride has to whisper the cost of her own dress, there's already a shadow in the room. That shadow arrived later the same afternoon, stepping out of a chauffeured car with the confidence of someone used to being received, not greeted. The mother-in-law had a presence so meticulously curated she didn't need to say a word. People simply stepped aside. Her jewelry caught the sunlight in calculated flashes, and I swear the air shifted around her like it recognized the hierarchy. She took one look at Amelia's dress during the fitting and let out a small, almost theatrical exhale. "Well," she murmured, "if that's what you want." The room froze. It wasn't the words, it was the tone. A tone I'd heard from luxury clients who believed disappointment was a form of currency. Amelia's shoulders dropped just enough for me to see the effect. Daniel tried to lighten the mood with a joke, but the woman dismissed him with a quick wave, the way some people brush off waitstaff when they're in a hurry. I watched Amelia's breath catch in her throat, and I could feel the real story beginning long before the honeymoon suite incident. Over the next few weeks, the woman's involvement expanded like a slow, creeping vine. She asked for detailed breakdowns of the wedding budget, not out of concern, but she insisted on reviewing the deposit schedules I had already sent the couple, highlighting any line that didn't match her vision. If a vendor cost more than she liked, she questioned the bride. If something cost less than she expected, she questioned me. And every time she hesitated before approving a payment, she did it with a warning smile. I could pull the funding, you know. She never said it directly, these people rarely do, but the implication hovered in the air, thick as humidity on the Charleston waterfront. Fake generosity is its own kind of weather system. It looks like sunshine to outsiders and feels like pressure to everyone underneath. One afternoon, while going over final arrangements, I noticed Danielle trying to negotiate between them like a man who had spent his entire life balancing on a family fault line. On the surface, his mother adored him. Underneath, she managed him the way some collectors manage investments, polishing them when it suited her, displaying them when it helped her image, securing them tightly when she sensed them slipping away. Amelia once confided to me that she felt like she was marrying into a brand rather than a family. She meant it as a joke. But her laugh didn't match the words. The more the woman inserted herself into decisions, menu tasting, floral design, music selection, the more the couple's confidence eroded. Amelia would make a choice, Daniel would support it, and 10 minutes later his mother would override it by declaring it not representative of our families. Standards, her favorite phrase, that one. She used it like a stamp on everything she disapproved of. I asked Amelia once, privately, if she felt comfortable. She hesitated, then admitted she'd grown up in a modest home where money wasn't something you used as a weapon. She said she felt like every decision came with a price tag. She hadn't agreed to not just financial, but emotional. The cost of the dress, the cost of the wedding, the cost of disappointing a woman who saw herself as the architect of the entire event. And every time she said thank you, it felt like payment. Meanwhile, vendors started coming to me with quiet concerns. The florist told me the mother-in-law had insisted on changing the color palette without consulting the bride. The catering manager said she kept showing up unannounced, demanding quality checks, a phrase she used so often it lost meaning. One of the seamstresses confessed that the woman repeatedly requested updates on the dress alterations, as if she were monitoring a construction site. There's something eerie about watching someone intertwine themselves into a wedding so completely that you stop being able to tell where the event ends and their ego begins. One night, after a particularly tense rehearsal, I found Amelia sitting alone by the water, her hands folded in her lap, wedding invoices scattered beside her like surrendered evidence. She looked exhausted, not from the preparations, but from the constant recalculations of how much gratitude she owed versus how much control she resisted. "I feel like she's paying for a wedding I didn't choose," she whispered. "And she wants me to thank her for the privilege." That moment stayed with me. It was the quietest part of the entire process, but somehow the loudest truth. These situations don't explode suddenly, they simmer, they marinate in entitlement. They soften the ground around the boundary until it collapses. And looking back, the honeymoon suite invasion didn't start at the door of that room. It started right here, in these small humiliations, wrapped in compliments. These tiny power moves, disguised as kindness. Tell me I'm not the only one who sees the red flag here. Because by that point, I could feel if this woman didn't simply want influence, she wanted possession. Of the wedding, of the narrative, and perhaps, in some distorted way, of her son's new life. The thing about women like her is that they rarely storm the castle. They prefer to rearrange the foundation, brick by brick. Until it's their house, you're living in even when your name is on the lease. With her, it was never one dramatic outburst. It was a series of tiny, controlled intrusions that everyone was supposed to be grateful for. The first real sign came from the venue coordinator a week before the wedding. She called me sounding confused, almost apologetic, like she'd just realized she was in the middle of a drama she hadn't signed up for. "Emily, I got a call from the groom's mother," she said. She asked if the honeymoon suite could have a connecting room added under the same reservation profile. She said it was for family convenience, in case they needed anything. I'm used to requests, I'm not easily shocked, but something about that phrasing put a weight in my stomach. A connecting room, not a room down the hall. Not on another floor. Attached. Accessible, seamlessly adjacent to the one place that should have been off-limits to everyone else. I asked the coordinator if the couple had approved it. They hadn't even been told. That's when my internal alarm went off. I've seen mothers-in-law try to control the menu, the playlist, the guest list. I've seen them hide invoices and forget to share contract changes. But the honeymoon suite, that was a new frontier. I called Daniel and asked if he knew anything about it. There was a pause on the line that told me the answer before he spoke. No, he finally said, sounding tired. She mentioned something about wanting to be nearby, but I thought she meant on the same floor, not attached. Are you comfortable with this? I asked. Another silence, then, it's just for one night. She paid for the suite. I don't want to start a war right before the wedding, and there it was again, the cost of peace. Not in dollars, but in swallowed boundaries. Over the next few days, more little details surfaced. Housekeeping staff mentioned that the woman had been walking the hallway outside the honeymoon suite earlier than most guests, just checking how things were coming along. She had a way of talking to staff that oscillated between charm and condescension, complimenting their professionalism while reminding them she was the one paying. At one point, the front desk manager pulled me aside. She asked if there was a way to have a master key, he said carefully, just in case the couple needed something and couldn't be reached. On paper, that sounds almost caring, almost, but real care respects the word no before it even needs to be spoken. What she wanted wasn't to help. She wanted surveillance, access, the ability to cross a line whenever it suited her under the cover of concern. I told him very clearly that only the couple and authorized staff should have access to that room. He nodded, but I could tell he felt torn. Guests like her don't just bring money into a property. They bring influence, connections, reputational pressure. Hotels feel it, vendors feel it, sometimes even planners feel it. Meanwhile, she continued to approve everything. That was her favorite term. Approve. She wanted to approve the final floral invoice, approve the revised seating chart, approve the additional late-night snacks the couple had added at their own expense. She even asked to see the updated total cost of the wedding, as if she were conducting an audit of assets she owned. I'd seen wealthy women be generous before, truly generous, in ways that empowered the couple. This wasn't that. This was financial leverage wrapped in a silk bow. One evening, during the final walkthrough, I watched her corner the photographer. She leaned in, speaking in a tone I've come to recognize as weaponized elegance. Make sure you capture plenty of shots of the suite, she told him. The view, the amenities, all of it. We invested a lot into that space. We, not they. He glanced at me over her shoulder, uncertainty written all over his face. He knew the honeymoon suite was meant to be private. He also knew who had signed the check for his extended coverage. Only if the couple is comfortable with it, I cut in. My voice was polite, but there was steel underneath. The suite is for them, not for documentation. The woman looked at me for a long moment. That kind of look that scans you, weighs you, files you under useful or obstacle. I've been filed under both in my career. That night, I knew exactly which folder she put me in. Later, as we finalized the timeline, she insisted on being involved in the couple's departure plan. It wasn't enough to know when they were leaving the reception. She wanted exact times, routes, and staff assignments. I'm only asking because I want to make sure they have everything they need, she said, with a smile that never quite reached her eyes. And since I've covered the most expensive parts of the wedding, including the room, it's only natural that I ensure everything is executed properly. The cost of the dress, the cost of the venue, the cost of the suite. She knew every figure, and she recited them like evidence in a case she was building quietly in her mind. Evidence that she was indispensable. Evidence that she was owed. On the day of the wedding, the energy in the resort shifted from anxious to electric. Guests arrived in designer outfits. Champagne flowed. The ocean breeze carried music out over the water. It was the kind of wedding that looked perfect from the outside, the kind people post about online as if it were a fairy tale. But behind the scenes, the numbers were still doing their own kind of talking. The couple had stretched themselves to contribute their share of the investment, carefully tracking unexpected costs that kept appearing at the edges of the budget. Upgraded linens, signature cocktails, extra decor, small add-ons that somehow always aligned with the woman's preferences, not Amelia's. During cocktail hour, one of the hotel staff pulled me aside, eyes wide with a mix of guilt and urgency. "Emily," she whispered, "I thought you should know. The groom's mother came by earlier asking to confirm her connecting room again. She said she might check in on them if things ran late." Check in. Another phrase that sounds harmless until you remember the context. I asked the staff member to show me the reservation file. That's when I saw it in writing. Not only had the connecting room been added, but the honeymoon suite itself had been quietly adjusted in the system, with her name listed as primary on one of the entries. She hadn't just booked herself nearby, she had entwined herself into the very documentation of the couple's private space. In that moment, standing behind the front desk with the glow of the computer screen reflecting off polished marble, I realized this wasn't a case of overinvolvement, it was strategy. She was building a framework that allowed her to say, later, I had a right to be there. And the worst part? Technically, on paper, she almost did. There's a point in every wedding where the noise fades just enough for the truth to be heard. For me, it happened sometime after the last champagne toast, when the guests drifted toward the after-party and the couple slipped away for a moment of quiet before entering the room that was supposed to belong solely to them. I stayed back in the hallway, giving them space. The night felt warm, humming with that soft electricity weddings tend to hold after all the rituals have been completed. You'd think this would be the part where everything settles. But in my line of work, this is usually when the private chapter begins. A few minutes later, the bride and groom walked ahead, toward the suite, fingers intertwined. I followed at a respectful distance, giving myself time to double-check that the room had been reset exactly how we planned. Rose petals, dim lighting, champagne cooling in a silver bucket. Every detail ready to welcome a couple who had spent months navigating storms they hadn't signed up for. What I didn't expect was the expression on Amelia's face the moment she reached the door. Her hand froze mid-air, hovering just above the handle. She pulled it back like she'd been burned. "Emily, why is this unlocked?" That single question was enough to send a chill through my stomach. I had personally verified the lock earlier. I'd watched staff secure it. There was no reason for that door to be anything but closed and sealed for the night. Daniel tried turning the handle. It moved effortlessly. When the door swung open, all three of us stopped because the room did not look the way I left it. Her luggage was there, neatly placed in the corner. The same designer luggage I had seen earlier that day inside that doorway, the one I tried to convince myself had been temporary, except now there was nothing temporary about it. Her belongings were unpacked, shoes lined up near the closet. A silk robe draped across the back of a chair. A jewelry case resting open on the vanity as if she had just stepped out for a moment. It wasn't just intrusion, it was occupancy. I stepped inside first, scanning the room the way I do when something is deeply wrong. Hotels have a rhythm, everything in its place, regulated, predictable. This wasn't that. This was someone claiming territory. On the bedside table, a handwritten note sat waiting, not for me, not for staff, for the couple. "I'll be nearby if you need anything. Since I arranged all of this, it makes sense that I stay close." Arranged all of this, a rewriting of reality in 5 words. I heard Amelia inhale sharply beside me. Not a gasp, something quieter, more internal. The sound of a boundary collapsing inside a person. Daniel's jaw tightened, but he didn't say a word. The air in the room felt heavy, like the fabric of the night had been pulled too tight. The petals on the bed looked out of place now, almost tragic. Romance can't coexist with surveillance. I asked the couple to wait in the hallway while I got answers. As soon as they stepped out, I called the front desk. My voice was calm, but every instinct in me was on high alert. When the hotel manager arrived, he looked uncomfortable. The kind of discomfort reserved for situations where the truth is about to implicate everyone. Emily, he said quietly. She came earlier with the reservation details. She said she was authorized. She insisted she funded the suite. She said she needed to inspect it and you let her in. I asked. He hesitated. She said she was the payer. The payer. It never ceases to amaze me how much chaos those two words can justify. I asked to see the access log. He pulled it up on the tablet, and there it was, in time-stamped clarity, her keycard used multiple times throughout the day, not once by mistake, not twice out of confusion. 14 separate entries. Somewhere inside me, something hardened, because patterns don't lie. 14 entries meant she wasn't checking in. She was positioning herself. The manager lowered his voice. She asked about the connecting room to. She said she needed it ready in case the couple wasn't prepared for responsibilities. We didn't know what that meant. I did. It meant she believed the marriage wasn't a union between adults, it was an extension of her authority, one she planned to supervise. When I stepped back into the hallway, Amelia and Daniel looked at me, as if bracing for a verdict. Their wedding night had turned into an investigation, and I could see the weight of that truth settling on their shoulders. Her luggage is inside the suite. Amelia finally asked, her voice thin. I nodded. Yes. And she entered multiple times today without permission. The silence that followed was the kind that shakes something loose in people. Daniel pressed his hands to his face. I didn't think she'd actually go this far. I wish I could have reassured him. I wish I could have told him this was the worst of it. But sometimes the truth doesn't cushion you, it confronts you. And standing in that hallway, with the wedding music fading in the distance and the ocean breeze pushing against the windows, I knew we were only seconds away from the moment everything would erupt. Because women who cross boundaries this boldly never back down on their own. They escalate. Daniel didn't raise his voice. That's what struck me first. People imagine confrontations erupt in shouting, but when the wound runs deep enough, the anger comes out quiet, controlled, focused. The kind of quiet that tells you someone has reached the end of their capacity and the beginning of their clarity. He took one long breath, then walked into the suite with a calmness that didn't match the storm building behind his eyes. Amelia followed, holding the doorframe like she needed something stable to lean against. I stayed a few steps back, giving them enough space to speak, but close enough in case the moment turned into something none of us wanted. The woman entered the hallway right on cue, as if this scene had been carefully arranged by her own invisible hand. Her heels clicked sharply against the marble floor, a sound with too much confidence. For someone walking toward the fallout of her own decisions. Oh good, you found my things, she said lightly, brushing past me as though I were part of the decor. I was worried housekeeping might have moved them. Her tone, I'll never forget it. Cheerful, pleasant. Completely out of sync with the devastation she'd caused. Some people destroy boundaries with rage. She destroyed them with poise. Daniel stepped forward. Mom, why are your things in our room? She blinked, genuinely surprised he'd question her. Because I need to make sure everything is acceptable for you. You know, these resorts can be unpredictable with standards. And considering I paid for the suite, he repeated, but it came out hollow, like he'd finally heard how absurd it sounded. She continued, oblivious or unwilling to register his shift. Well, yes, I would think the person investing the most into this wedding should have some oversight. And it's only for tonight. Or tomorrow. We can decide as we go. We, that single word cut deeper than anything else. Amelia took a small step backward, the kind you take when your body realizes a truth before your mind does. I watched her fingers press lightly against her stomach, not as a gesture of fear, but grief, the kind that comes when the future you imagined suddenly feels threatened. Mom, Daniel said again, quieter this time. You weren't supposed to be in here. This is our space. She laughed. Actually laughed. Oh, sweetheart, don't be dramatic. You'll thank me later. I'm only trying to help you start things off on the right foot. I don't know what broke him. Maybe it was the dismissiveness, maybe the laughter, maybe the realization that this wasn't a misunderstanding, it was intentional, but something shifted. His shoulders squared, not in aggression, but acceptance. The kind that comes when a son finally sees his mother, not as a caregiver, but as a force he must protect his partner from. Put no need to leave, he said. The air stilled. She froze mid-motion, her hand hovering over her luggage. Excuse me, you heard me, he replied. This is our room, our night, our marriage. You don't get to be in here. Her face didn't crumple or redden, it sharpened, tightened. There was something chilling about the way her eyes narrowed, as if recalculating the power dynamics in real time. Are you speaking to me? She said slowly, because she told you to. She didn't even look at Amelia when she said it. She didn't need to. The contempt was directed at the air, the space, the idea of another woman influencing her son. No, he said. I'm speaking because I should have said this a long time ago. The words landed with a volume that didn't need sound. She took one step toward him, her voice dripping with soft venom. I have financially supported this entire wedding. The least you could do is show some gratitude. Gratitude doesn't mean access, he said. For a moment, no one breathed. Then everything happened fast. She reached for her suitcase, not to leave, but to pull it further into the room, as if doubling down on her claim. And that's when hotel security appeared behind me, alerted by the manager, who must have realized the situation wouldn't resolve quietly. Ma'am, the guard said, professional, but firm. You cannot stay in this suite. She spun around, stunned that anyone would dare oppose her. Do you have any idea who I am? My family, ma'am, he repeated gently, but without apology. This room belongs to the guests, not to you. Her mouth opened, then closed. She turned to Daniel for rescue, but he didn't move. And that silence, that refusal to be her shield, was the final blow. Security didn't touch her. They didn't need to. The humiliation wasn't physical, it was social, visible, public, a kind of reckoning she'd never experienced because people rarely dared to hold her accountable. She lifted her chin, grabbed her luggage with shaking hands, and swept out of the room with the elegance of someone who refuses to admit defeat even while carrying it. I watched her disappear down the hallway, and for the first time that day, the suite felt like it truly belonged to the couple. Inside, Amelia sank onto the edge of the bed, tears forming, but not falling. Not sadness, relief. The kind that comes when a fight you've silently feared finally erupts, and you realize you're not fighting alone. Daniel sat beside her and placed his hand over hers. No words. None were needed. I stepped back, giving them privacy at last, and couldn't shake the thought that entitlement disguised as generosity may be the most dangerous form of sabotage. It's silent, it's strategic, and it often goes unpunished. But not tonight. Long after the hallway emptied and the last remnants of the confrontation settled into silence, I found myself standing alone on the balcony outside the suite. The ocean breeze carried the faint sound of waves hitting the pier, rhythmic and steady, the exact opposite of the emotional turbulence that had unfolded just minutes earlier. Nights like this always remind me how fragile the boundary is between a perfect wedding and the truth that hides behind perfected images. Inside the suite, Amelia and Daniel finally had what should have been theirs from the start: privacy. Real privacy, not the curated version families pretend to respect. The genuine kind, where two people start the first quiet chapter of their marriage without onlookers, expectations, or surveillance disguised as care. I stepped back into the room just briefly to make sure everything was in place. The petals were still scattered across the bed, but they no longer looked like part of a ruined scene. They felt reclaimed. The champagne on the table glistened under soft lighting, not as a symbol of the woman's financial leverage, but as something the couple could finally enjoy without the weight of her presence lingering in every corner. When I looked at Amelia, she wasn't glowing with fairy tale excitement. She was steady, grounded. A woman who had just seen the truth of the family, she married into the strength of the man who chose her anyway. There's a different kind of beauty in that moment, the kind that isn't reflected in photos or wedding reels. It lives in the shift of someone realizing they're safe. Not because circumstances are perfect, but because someone finally drew a line and meant it. Daniel looked exhausted in a way no groom should look on his wedding night, but there was clarity in his eyes I hadn't seen before. The kind that comes when a lifetime pattern breaks. I've watched many sons struggle with that decision, torn between loyalty and autonomy, between gratitude and freedom, but something about the way he stood, there no apology. No hesitation told me he'd crossed an internal threshold he couldn't go back from. Every wedding I've ever worked has its own rhythm. Some stories rise gently, some fall apart loudly. But the ones involving a mother-in-law who believes money entitles her to access, those stories leave a different kind of imprint. They force everyone to reveal who they are when generosity is no longer a transaction. As I left the couple to their night, the hallway felt unusually quiet. No echo of heels. No familiar scent of expensive perfume. No shadow stretching beneath the suite door, hinting at another intrusion. Just stillness. A stillness that felt earned. Walking back toward the elevators, I couldn't shake the lingering weight of the woman's final expression, her disbelief. That anyone dared question her authority. People like her rarely consider themselves intruders. In their minds, they are the center, the axis around which the family rotates. They don't enter spaces, they inhabit them, and they expect admiration for every boundary they break. But weddings have a way of revealing truth. You can decorate a venue, select luxury menus, and dress dysfunction in couture. But sooner or later, someone shows you who they really are. By the time I reached the lobby, the music from the reception had softened into warm background noise. Staff moved quietly, resetting spaces for the next morning. I paused at the entrance, letting the cool night air brush against my face, and felt the strange mixture of relief and reflection that tends to settle after a crisis resolves, just enough to breathe again. I thought back to all the times throughout the planning process when the woman had insisted she just wanted the best for the couple. How often she used the wedding budget as currency. How her version of generosity came with strings that turned into ropes the moment she felt she wasn't being worshipped for her contributions. So many families mistake control for love. But control isn't love, it's possession wrapped in sentiment. What struck me most wasn't her interference. It was how easily she justified it. She didn't think she'd done anything wrong, and I wondered, as I stood there watching the lights from the harbor shimmer against the water, how many people would have seen her intrusion as an honest mistake, a misguided attempt to help, a misunderstanding between a mother and her son. But the truth was etched into every choice she made that day. She hadn't crossed the boundary accidentally. She never believed the boundary applied to her at all. And that leaves only one question echoing in my mind long after the night ended. Would you have considered that an honest mistake or a calculated invasion of privacy? I found Lila in the honeymoon suite wearing a hotel robe and mascara smudged under her eyes, the kind of smudge that doesn't come from tears alone, but from humiliation, layered on top of exhaustion. She wasn't alone in the room. The woman, her mother-in-law, was standing near the window, rearranging pillows and adjusting curtains, as if she were prepping the scene for a lifestyle magazine. A photographer was unpacking equipment at her direction. It took me a full second to process what I was seeing. This was supposed to be the first quiet hour after the ceremony, the moment couples finally breathed. But instead of peace, Lila was watching someone else curate her honeymoon suite like it belonged to a family brand rather than a marriage. When the woman noticed me in the doorway, she waved with a smile too bright to be genuine. Perfect timing, Emily. I'm resetting the room so we can get some elevated photos. The lighting isn't cooperating, but I'll fix that. She spoke as if she were doing a public service. Lila whispered. She told him she needed professional content for the family. I didn't even know he was coming. That's when I understood. This wasn't about memories. This was about image, her image. And she was willing to bulldoze the couple's privacy to maintain it. The worst part, Lila didn't look surprised, just defeated. I stepped fully into the room. "This suite is off limits," I said. "The couple needs their space." The woman didn't even turn around. "Don't be dramatic, Emily, they'll thank me. I upgraded their room, their dress, their menu, I'm elevating their standards. Someone has to." Her tone was soft, but the message was sharp. "I pay. I decide." She adjusted a throw blanket, then added, almost casually, "Besides, I changed their honeymoon reservation. They'll have the adjoining suite next to mine in Tahoe. Much better layout." My breath caught. She wasn't just in their wedding, she was in their marriage. When she finally faced me, her expression carried the same polished confidence I'd seen on socialites who believe boundaries are optional suggestions. Marcus understands. He knows family reputation matters. But when Marcus entered the room moments later and saw the photographer, something cracked open in him. A recognition. A final line drawn. "What are you doing here?" he asked his mother quietly. She looked genuinely confused by the question. "Preparing your room?" "No," he said. "You're invading our room." The photographer froze Midland's adjustment. Lila wiped a tear with the back of her hand. I stepped back slowly, giving the moment its space. Moments like these don't need witnesses, they need honesty. "You need to leave," Marcus said. And unlike the groom from my last wedding, he didn't tremble, he didn't hesitate. He sounded like a man suddenly unburdened by a lifetime of subtle manipulation. The woman's face hardened. "After everything I've paid for, you're choosing her image over ours." "No," he said. "I'm choosing my wife." Her silence was thunderous, and for the first time all night, the room belonged to the couple. For weeks leading up to the wedding, I had watched the tension build like fog rolling across Lake Tahoe, slow, quiet, but thick enough to swallow the sunlight. The woman carried herself like someone who believed appearances were a moral obligation, and Lila, she carried herself like someone who had learned to shrink so others could shine. One afternoon during dress fittings, the dynamic became painfully clear. Lila stepped out of the dressing room wearing a gown that fit her perfectly, not extravagant, not modest, simply her. The room softened around her. Even the seamstress paused, admiring the quiet beauty of it. Then the mother-in-law looked up from her phone. "That's the dress?" she asked, as if Lila were modeling a clearance item. "It's fine, but fine isn't really aligned with our family's standard, is it? We need something more elevated." She said the word elevated the way some people say salvation. Lila wilted a little. Marcus reached for her hand, but she slipped it away gently, not wanting him to feel responsible. That's when the woman delivered the blow. "I'll upgrade it. A designer gown. It's my gift. A gift." Except there was always a payment tucked beneath her ribboned generosity. Later, Lila confided in me quietly, "Her gifts feel like invoices I haven't received yet." She wasn't wrong. As the wedding approached, vendors began receiving new secret instructions from the woman. She emailed the Honeymoon hotel, altering the reservation behind the couple's backs. She inserted herself into decision-making with the confidence of someone who believed her wealth granted her veto power. I once caught her telling the florist not to contact me because she handled all matters involving money. She occupied the entire planning structure the way ivy consumes a building, slowly, beautifully, destructively. By the time the wedding day arrived, the weight of her presence felt woven into every detail. Even the scenic Mountain Lodge estate seemed subdued under her expectations. During cocktail hour, I noticed her stepping aside to take a call. Her voice carried just enough for me to hear, sharp and precise. "Yes, the adjoining suite. They'll understand once they see the photos." Photos. She wasn't planning memories, she was planning marketing. When I approached her later, she smiled like nothing in her world had cracks. "Image is everything. Emily, they'll thank me someday." But that's the thing about image, it only thrives when people don't notice the cost. And the cost of this wedding was written all over Leela's face, even under the layers of makeup meant to hide stress. What I didn't know yet was just how far the woman had gone to maintain that image. Until the moment I stepped into the honeymoon suite and saw her directing the photographer like it was her own private studio. Looking back, every red flag had been waving long before that moment. I just hadn't realized she was preparing not for a wedding, but for a performance. There's a specific look people get when they realize a line they thought was invisible has been crossed. It's not shock, it's not anger, it's recognition. And when Marcus walked into that honeymoon suite and saw his mother orchestrating a full-blown shoot, that recognition hit him like a cold wave straight from Lake Tahoe. The photographer looked trapped, like he'd been hired into a family feud he never asked to witness. Lila stood near the bathroom door, arms tucked around her torso, shrinking deeper into her robe as if trying to disappear into the fabric. The woman, meanwhile, continued adjusting the angle of a lamp. "Marcus, you're early," she said, not even turning. "We're almost ready. I'm capturing some elevated shots, something you too can use for announcements, thank yous, maybe even the holiday card. Trust me, you want this." He stared at her. "Mom, this is our suite." She waved a dismissive hand. "I know that. But you were downstairs. And this lighting won't last." I moved closer to Leela, gently placing a hand on her back. Her voice shook when she whispered. She said I wasn't presenting the room well enough, so she took over. I didn't know what to do. I could feel her humiliation like static in the air. Marcus stepped between his mother and the photographer. "Stop, right now." The room froze. For a moment, I thought she might laugh the way she had with Amelia's dress light, dismissive, belittling. But something in his tone startled her. She straightened slowly, turning toward him with the practiced grace of someone who had spent her entire life answering to no one. "Sweetheart," she said softly, "I'm doing this for you. For us. You know how important it is that our family looks." He cut her off. "This isn't about family. You're invading our space." Again, her face shifted just slightly, the way ice cracks before it breaks. "I changed your honeymoon booking for your benefit," she insisted. "The resort needed my approval, so I upgraded the suite. That's what I do. I fix things." "No," he said. "You control things." The photographer quietly lowered his camera. I could see the calculation behind her eyes. That rapid mental scan wealthy parents sometimes do when they realize the old rules aren't working anymore. She stepped toward Marcus, lowering her voice into a tone meant only for him meant to remind him who had financed every part of this wedding. "I rescued you from debt," she whispered. "Everything here exists because of me. You can't speak to me like this." But he didn't flinch. "And none of that means you get to walk into our honeymoon suite." Her lips parted, then closed. She looked genuinely stunned that her financial leverage wasn't holding, that her son wasn't folding the way he always had. Lila reached for Marcus's hand, a small gesture, but it carried the weight of everything she'd endured silently during the planning. He squeezed her hand back, grounding both of them in something simple and strong. Then Marcus turned to the photographer. "You can pack up, you're done here." The photographer didn't need a second invitation. The woman stood there, isolated for the first time all night, not powerful, not poised, just a person finally facing the consequences of entitlement she'd mistaken for love. "You're embarrassing yourself," she said weakly. "No," Marcus replied. "You did that when you walked in here." She looked around the room as if expecting someone to defend her. No one moved. Even the silence seemed to reject her. And in that moment, something inside her cracked, not enough to change her, but enough to reveal her fear. Fear of losing control. Fear of losing her place. Fear of her son finally seeing her clearly. She grabbed her purse with a shaky breath and walked past me toward the door. "You're making a mistake," she murmured. Marcus didn't answer. And when the door clicked shut behind her, the air shifted lighter, cleaner, as if her absence restored oxygen to the room. Leela let out a trembling exhale, half relief, half disbelief. I didn't think he'd ever stand up to her, she said. I smiled softly. Sometimes weddings bring out the worst in people, but sometimes they bring out the truth. And in that truth, the couple finally had something the woman couldn't buy or steal, a moment of their own. Long after the confrontation ended, the suite settled into a quiet that felt entirely different from the silence I walked into earlier. This wasn't the silence of tension, it was the silence of a room finally handed back to the people it belonged to. Leela sat on the edge of the bed, her shoulders slowly loosening, like she was rediscovering the weight of her own body after carrying someone else's expectations for too long. Marcus paced a little, running a hand through his hair, still processing the shock of realizing how far his mother had gone. But even in his exhaustion, there was a steadiness to him I hadn't seen before. When he finally sat beside his wife, their shoulders touched in that quiet, instinctive way. Couples lean on each other when the storm has passed, but the air is still crackling with leftover energy. No grand declarations, no dramatic moments, just a simple, grounding closeness. I made my way around the suite one last time, resetting the space not because it needed to be perfect, but because it needed to feel like theirs again. I folded a blanket, straightened the champagne glasses, dimmed the lights. Small gestures, but sometimes small gestures are the first layer of healing. Lila looked up at me and said, almost in a whisper, "Thank you for not letting her turn our first night into a photo shoot." I smiled gently. Tonight isn't about anyone's image, it's about the two of you. And as I stepped toward the doorway, something inside me paused. So much of wedding planning is about logistics, timelines, budgets, aesthetics. But moments like this, these raw, vulnerable turning points, are the real heart of the job. This is where marriages begin, not in grand entrances or perfect floral installations, but in the quiet reclaiming of what should never have been stolen. As I walked out into the hushed hallway, I couldn't stop thinking about the woman's obsession with reputation. How she had rewritten reservations, engineered a photo shoot, and inserted herself into the couple's most intimate space, all in the name of status. In her mind, she wasn't the villain. She was the architect of an image she believed the couple owed her. But the truth revealed itself in the simplest way. The moment Marcus told her to leave, the family dynamic snapped into clarity. Status wasn't worth what she expected him to sacrifice for it. Not his autonomy, not his marriage, not his integrity. Some families build their legacy out of love, others build it out of control and call it love. And as the elevator doors closed behind me, one question lingered sharp, honest, and echoing with everything we had just witnessed: is status worth destroying your son's marriage before it even begins? I hadn't even reached the ballroom doors when the hotel's head of security intercepted me. His expression was the kind people wear when they've witnessed something unsettling but aren't sure how to explain it without sounding dramatic. That alone told me everything I needed to know. Another mother-in-law had decided the wedding boundaries were merely decorative. "Emily," he said quietly, "there's an older woman trying to enter the honeymoon suite. She insists she owns the room. Owns, not reserved, not paid for, owns. There's a particular energy that comes with entitlement, that deep it hangs in the air like static before a storm." As we walked toward the elevator, he explained that she'd tried to bypass staff by flashing a stack of receipts from the cost of the wedding, waiving her funding decisions like royal documents, and when they told her she didn't have authorization, she laughed. She said, "I paid for the entire wedding. I'll decide when I enter my son's room." I felt a familiar tightness settle between my ribs, the kind that comes when the financial architecture of a wedding starts being used as a weapon rather than a contribution. Ethan and Harper had warned me gently throughout the process that his mother-in-law, the benefactor, as she jokingly called herself, liked to oversee the investments she made. That phrase haunted me from the moment I first heard it. Investments, not gifts, not support. Investments. And investments, by definition, expect returns. In this case, the return was control. During the planning, she'd made herself the silent architect of every financial decision. She covered the entire wedding budget: venue, catering, dress, decor, even small indulgences the couple hadn't asked for. And yet each gesture felt strangely conditional, like a loan with unwritten terms. Harper once told me, in a trembling half-joke, she doesn't pay for things, she purchases influence. That wasn't an exaggeration. I had seen her question the cost of the dress, not because it was high, but because it wasn't high enough. She insisted on upgrades that weren't part of the couple's vision, then signed the additional charges to the hotel using her own card without telling them. And when I pushed back, she gave me the kind of smile wealthy people wear when they're reminding you that money is the real coordinator in the room. But nothing prepared me for the sight waiting at the honeymoon suite hallway. The benefactor stood beside the door, keycard in hand, tapping it repeatedly against the lock like someone trying to access a safe deposit box. Her posture was rigid, not frantic, the posture of someone who fully believed she had every right to be there. When she saw me, she lifted her chin. Good. You can clarify to them that I have full authorization to inspect this room. I'm the payer. That word again. Always, that word. I stayed calm, even though every instinct in me screamed that this was more than intrusion, it was escalation. The suite is private, I told her. You don't have access. She chuckled, like I was new to the business. Emily dear, I had the reservation transferred into my name this morning. Hotel staff already confirmed it. I'm simply checking what I paid for. My stomach dropped. Reservation transferred. She had done more than break a boundary, she had rewritten the paper trail. I asked security for the access logs. For entries. All hers, and not spaced randomly timed. 2 hours before the ceremony. 1 during the vows. 1 as the couple took photos. She hadn't stumbled onto the boundary. She had mapped it. I stepped between her and the door. You need to stop. She narrowed her eyes, her voice dropping to a tone that carried decades of unchallenged dominance. Harper is marrying into a family with standards. If I'm footing the entire cost of the wedding, I will ensure everything meets those standards, including the suite. This wasn't about quality. It was about ownership. The cost of the wedding had become the cost of their autonomy. As security persuaded her to step aside, I caught a flash of emotion across her face. Not embarrassment, not guilt, but irritation that her authority was being questioned. And in that moment, I understood the real danger. She didn't want access to their honeymoon suite out of curiosity or concern. She wanted access because she believed paying for the wedding meant she owned the marriage. And if she had gone this far before the couple even entered the room, I could only imagine how far she'd go once she decided they weren't living up to her expectations. Sometimes the red flag isn't the intrusion itself. It's how natural the intruder thinks it is. When I first met Harper, she told me something I didn't fully understand at the time. Ethan's mother thinks she's saving us, she said, smoothing the fabric of her dress while avoiding eye contact. But sometimes I feel like she's saving us from a life we didn't ask to be part of. I didn't know then how literal that would become. During the planning, the benefactor inserted herself into every detail with the precision of someone managing a corporate acquisition rather than a wedding. She didn't request updates, she demanded financial reports. She didn't ask about the cost of the dress, she asked why Harper had chosen something so simple when she could afford something that reflects her new status. It wasn't a question, it was a reprimand. The vendors felt it too. They would pull me aside one by one, never wanting their concerns to be overheard. The florist whispered. She switched the order. She said the couple wanted a more expensive arrangement. The caterer confessed. She requested an upgraded menu and told me to bill it quietly under the general expenses. The decorator showed me an invoice she'd scribbled notes on. Adjust lighting. Bride doesn't understand ambience. Each time, her changes inflated the cost of the wedding, and each time she emphasized how she was heroically absorbing those unexpected costs. Fake generosity layered over financial manipulation like frosting hiding a knife. The worst part wasn't the changes, it was the way she repositioned herself as the savior of every decision. She kept reminding Ethan that without her, none of this would be possible, that the cost of the wedding was a blessing, but one that required oversight. As if the couple's marriage were an investment portfolio she was cultivating. I noticed, too, how Harper dimmed around her. She wasn't a quiet woman by nature, but the benefactor's presence pushed her into silence like a physical force. Every time she tried to express a preference, the woman would interrupt gently, always gently. "Sweetheart, trust me, you'll want something impressive for the photos, or worse, that's not what people expect from our family. Our family." As if Harper were a guest auditioning for a role. The tension escalated the week before the wedding when I received a message from the hotel accounting office. "Emily, there are new charges on the couple's account, premium upgrades, signed by the groom's mother." Upgrades, plural. She had altered the photography package, the suite amenities, the floral budget, the reception lighting, even the sound system. She treated every contract like a playground, assuming no one would object because she was covering the expenses. But the truth was simpler and far more dangerous. She was reshaping the wedding so the couple would always remember who held the financial power. The day before the ceremony, I encountered her in the lobby speaking to a staff member. She wasn't angry. Younger would have been easier to track. She was calm, collected, the kind of calm that bends rules without ever raising its voice. "I want the suite under my name," she was saying. "I need to supervise what I paid for." Supervise. The same word she'd used earlier about the dress, the menu, the decor. It wasn't about oversight. It was about dominion. When she walked away, the young staffer turned to me and said quietly, "She scares me a little." I understood. She scared me to not because she was loud or cruel, but because she was strategic, calculated. The kind of person who believes love is measured in invoices and devotion is owed with interest. On the morning of the ceremony, while Harper was getting ready, I caught a moment between her and Ethan that revealed the truth neither had said out loud. He kissed her forehead gently and said, "After today, we'll have our own life, I promise." Harper nodded, but her eyes glossed over, not from romance, but from fear. Promises are hard to believe when someone else is already arranging your future behind closed doors. By the time security notified me about the benefactor attempting to enter the suite, I understood exactly what was happening. This wasn't a misunderstanding or a moment of overexcitement. It was the culmination of months of quiet domination. A woman who believed paying for the wedding granted her access to anything, rooms, decisions, people. A woman who didn't see boundaries as limits, but as suggestions. A woman who didn't intend to witness the marriage. She intended to manage it. And as I stood in that hallway watching her argue with security, I realized this wasn't just another case of intrusive behavior. This was the clearest example of a mother-in-law who didn't pay for the wedding. She bought the illusion of ownership. When I reached the honeymoon suite after the ceremony, I found the hallway unusually still, as if even the hotel itself sensed something was about to unravel. These moments always carry a kind of charged quieten, almost ceremonial pause before the truth presents itself. Harper and Ethan walked ahead of me, fingers intertwined, sharing that fragile, blissful exhaustion couples feel right after dancing through their own celebration. This should have been the moment where they exhaled. Their first moment alone. Their first moment to begin a marriage without an audience. But the second Ethan slipped the keycard into the door, he froze. A soft click, then the unmistakable sound of a second lock disengaging. I felt the shift immediately. Honeymoon suites don't unlock themselves. When the door swung open, the room wasn't empty. Her scent was the first thing we noticed, expensive floral perfume lingering in the air like a signature. Then the details surfaced one by one. A silk scarf draped over the lounge chair, a pair of heels neatly tucked beside the sofa, a half-filled glass of sparkling water on the vanity. The benefactor had been here. Recently, Harper pressed a hand to her chest, her breath catching. She was in our room. Ethan moved deeper into the suite, his expression darkening as he spotted a folder sitting near the minibar. Inside were receipts, multiple receipts showing upgrades she had added to their stay without telling them. Enhanced amenities, premium services, hidden expenses, charges she expected them to be grateful for. Then we found the note. Written in her elegant cursive. I'll return shortly to finalize the inspection. Don't worry, everything is in excellent condition. I take care of what I pay for. The words hit Ethan like impact. Not I want the best for you, not I hope you enjoy your night. I take care of what I pay for. Ownership disguised as affection. Control disguised as generosity. He stood completely still for a moment, shoulders rising and falling with slow, heavy breaths. Then he looked at Harper, not with anger toward her, but with a tremendous, quiet apology for bringing this dynamic into their marriage. I'm so sorry, he whispered. I should have stopped this sooner. Harper shook her head gently. You didn't do this. She did. I stepped forward. There's more you should see. The hotel manager had sent me the digital logs earlier, and I pulled them up on my phone. The entries told a story all on their own. She had accessed the suite repeatedly throughout the day, including at times when the couple was on the property and clearly not expecting visitors. 4 times before the ceremony. Once while they were taking photos, and once just 15 minutes before they walked in. She hadn't simply been curious. She had been monitoring Harper's face, paled as she scanned the timestamps. She came in during our vows. Ethan rubbed his forehead, looking like the ground beneath him had shifted. She thinks paying for the wedding means she owns every part of it. And that was the moment the door handle moved. All 3 of us turned sharply as it began to twist. She was coming back. Ethan stepped forward, blocking the entrance before it could open fully. The door cracked open just enough for her voice to slip through. I just need to finalize the "you're not coming in," Ethan said. Silence. Then, slowly, the door closed again, but not before I saw a flicker of disbelief in her expression. She hadn't expected resistance. She hadn't prepared for the possibility that her son would ever tell her no. We stood frozen, listening to her footsteps retreat down the hallway. Each step landing with the weight of a lifetime of unchallenged authority, suddenly denied. Inside the suite, Harper exhaled shakily. Are we safe now? I nodded, though deep inside I knew this wasn't over. Women like her don't collapse at the first barrier. They regroup, they strategize, they return with revised tactics. But for tonight, the message had been sent. Ethan had chosen his marriage over her control. And that shift, quiet but seismic, was the first real act of independence I'd seen from him since the planning began. As they locked the door behind them, I realized something important. The benefactor hadn't invaded the suite to sabotage the night. She invaded it because she believed access was her right. And in families like hers, denial of that access is the first rebellion. Even after the benefactor's footsteps faded down the hallway, the tension she left behind settled into the suite like humidity, dense, lingering, refusing to lift. I stayed for a few moments, giving the couple the grounding presence people sometimes need after witnessing someone they love reveal such an uncomfortable truth. Harper sat on the edge of the bed, her fingers tracing the embroidery on the duvet, not really seeing it, just needing something steady beneath her palms. Ethan kneeled in front of her, speaking softly. And though I couldn't hear the words, I could tell he wasn't trying to fix anything. He was trying to acknowledge it. Sometimes that's the only thing that actually helps. I don't want our marriage to start like this, Harper whispered when I got closer. It won't, Ethan said. And something about the way he said it told me he meant it not as a promise to control his mother, but as a promise to protect what the 2 of them were trying to build. For a long moment, the 3 of us just breathed in the quiet. No arguments, no explanations, no crashing emotions. Just a shared recognition that something had shifted, something that needed to shift. I checked the suite one last time, removing the scattered reminders of the benefactor's intrusions. Her receipts, her scarf, the sparkling water she'd left half-finished, little pieces of presents that didn't belong in the couple's private space. I set everything outside the door for staff to handle later. When the hallway swallowed the door clicking shut, the room finally exhaled. It didn't feel invaded anymore. It felt reclaimed. Harper looked around slowly, almost relearning the room with her eyes. "It's supposed to feel like a beginning," she murmured. "But she keeps trying to make it feel like something she owns." "She can only own what you agreed to give her," I said gently. The truth landed not like advice, but like permission. Ethan sat beside her, his posture softer now, stripped of the adrenaline from the confrontation. He didn't look angry. He looked awake. Families like his often treat control as tradition inheritance, and the moment a child steps outside that pattern, the whole family system rattles. But that rattling is the sound of freedom starting. As I walked toward the door, Harper stopped me. "Emily, is it always this hard?" she asked. Her voice was small but steady, the voice of someone piecing herself together in real time. "Not always," I said. "But when money becomes a weapon, it doesn't take much to confuse control with care. What matters is that you both saw it clearly tonight." She nodded, holding Ethan's hand like it was an anchor. There's a peculiar kind of relief that comes after a boundary is broken and then repaired. It doesn't erase the hurt, but it solidifies the line. And as the couple settled into the suite, I realized this night, messy, stressful, chaotic, had given them something the benefactor never intended: a united front. When I stepped back into the hallway, the hotel lighting cast soft reflections along the polished floor. The air had changed. The tension was gone, replaced by a subtle calmness that always lingers when the truth finally has room to breathe. I took one last look at the suite door, closed and locked, and felt the weight of the entire day settle behind my ribs. The benefactor had come dangerously close to rewriting the meaning of that room, turning a sanctuary into a performance stage, but the couple had taken it back quietly, firmly, together. Control can be purchased, access can be negotiated, but respect, that must be earned. And tonight, she'd learned what money couldn't buy. As I headed toward the elevator, a single question rose in my mind, sharp, honest, and impossible to ignore after everything I'd witnessed. If someone pays for your wedding, does that give them the right to cross your most intimate boundaries? When I arrived at the historic hotel in New York City, I felt the hum of old wealth woven into the walls: polished brass, carved wood, portraits of ancestors staring down corridors like they were still monitoring the family legacy. Some venues carry history, others enforce it. This one did both. Sophia's wedding was supposed to be elegant, intimate, a merging of two families with different backgrounds and different kinds of pressure. She was soft-spoken, warm, and deeply in love with Adrian. He was the kind of groom who instinctively reached for her hand when she grew nervous. They were a sweet match until his mother entered the picture, the woman who insisted everyone call her the controller, as if it were an affectionate nickname, carried herself like someone who believed tradition was a currency. And she was very, very wealthy. From the moment I met her, she spoke as though the wedding belonged to her ancestors, not her son. "This hotel," she told me during our first walkthrough, "has held every major event for our family since 1923. I hope Sophia understands the weight of that." Understand the weight. I'd heard her use that phrase more than once. The first real incident happened during the dress fitting. Sophia stepped out wearing a gown that suited her perfectly clean lines, understated beauty, timeless elegance. The controller looked her up and down with narrowed eyes. "No," she said, "this is not refined. You must alter the neckline. And the sleeves. And the waist. Our family does not present brides in dresses that lack legacy." Legacy, in her vocabulary, that word didn't refer to culture or history. It meant control. Sophia tried to push back gently. I chose this because it feels like me. The controller smiled soft, cold. After you marry Adrian, who you are will evolve. It was the kind of sentence that sounds philosophical until you hear what's underneath it. She wasn't describing growth, she was describing replacement. Throughout the planning, she inserted herself into decisions with surgical precision. Ceremony, order, seating hierarchy, floral symbolism, she had opinions on everything, and every opinion came packaged as tradition, even when the traditions sounded conveniently invented. At one point, she asked me to rearrange the processional because, in her words, Sophia hasn't yet earned the right to lead the family visually. It took me a few seconds to even process what that meant. Behind the scenes, the staff whispered the same phrase over and over. She treats this wedding like an audition. They weren't wrong. Her influence grew more unsettling when she began making unapproved visits to the honeymoon floor. Housekeeping told me she'd been asking to inspect the suite for adherence to family expectations. Someone else reported she'd been placing personal belongings in the room during the setup: expensive perfume, silk slippers, even a monogrammed throw blanket. I confronted her about it discreetly. The suite is private, I said. You can't leave items inside. She waved one hand dismissively. I'm preparing it for them. That room is part of our legacy. I will not allow careless use. Careless use. As if marital privacy were a fragile antique needing supervision. But the moment that truly alarmed me came the night before the wedding. Sophia and I sat reviewing her timeline. Going over small details, she wanted to feel present for her vows, her father's speech, a moment alone before the ceremony. She hesitated, then lowered her voice. Emily, she asked to approve the jewelry Ethan bought me. She said she needs to inspect it before the wedding to ensure it aligns with the family image. My breath caught. And, Sophia continued, she wants access to the honeymoon suite after the reception. She said it's tradition for her to bless the space. Bless the space. I'd heard many cultural rituals in my career, but nothing about this sounded ceremonial. It sounded invasive. As Sophia spoke, I could see it in her eyes, the quiet dread of someone realizing their wedding wasn't an event they were a part of. It was a stage they'd been placed on, and the controller wasn't done, not even close. Because traditions in her family weren't passed down. They were enforced. The morning of the wedding felt heavier than it should have. Historic hotels have a way of absorbing tension. They trap it in the carpets, in the chandeliers, even in the polite smiles of staff who've seen too much. As I moved through the hallway, I could feel the controller's influence like a pressure system settling across the entire floor. Sophia was getting ready in a suite overlooking Manhattan. Sunlight streamed in, catching the gold accents of her dress. For a brief moment, she looked peaceful. Then the door opened and the peace vanished. The controller entered with the confidence of someone walking into a board meeting she owned. She barely glanced at Sophia before gesturing at the makeup artist. Toned down the eyes. Our family doesn't present women with such dramatic choices. Sophia's cheeks flushed. I stepped in quickly. We're already on schedule. Any further changes will delay. She raised her hand, silencing me with a gesture so smooth it bordered on royal. Emily, dear, I appreciate your concern, but tradition outranks schedule. Tradition. I was beginning to understand that in her world, that word was just another form of surveillance. Throughout the morning, she hovered, adjusting flowers, rearranging the bridesmaids, rewriting portions of the ceremony she claimed were misaligned with family standards. Every correction came with that same cold gentleness, like kindness, dipped in control. But things escalated when I found housekeeping in the hallway, whispering nervously. One of them pulled me aside. She asked us to move her things into the honeymoon suite, she said, eyes wide. Not just items. Her overnight bag. I felt the same sharp chill I'd felt during other weddings, where control turned into intrusion. What did she say it was for? I asked. She said she has to supervise for tradition, that it's her duty. I took the elevator straight to the honeymoon floor. And there, it was her monogrammed overnight bag placed neatly inside the suite doorway, like a placeholder for her presence. The room, meant to be private, now felt contaminated by entitlement. I removed the bag myself and brought it back to her floor. She wasn't surprised to see me holding it. In fact, she looked almost amused. "You misunderstood," she told me, smoothing her dress. "It's not intrusion, it's legacy. Someone must protect the family line. Family line, legacy, tradition. Every word a shield for control." But what she didn't know, what I didn't realize until later, was that Sophia had already reached her breaking point long before I arrived with the bag. While I was gone, she received a message. Not from a bridesmaid, not from a vendor. From the controller herself. A voice memo. I found Sophia standing in the bridal suite when I returned, phone in hand, tears forming but not falling. She handed me the device with a trembling breath. "Listen." The controller's voice filled the room, smooth and emotionless. "Adrian will follow tradition. If he doesn't, I will reconsider the inheritance distribution. I refuse to see our family diminished. You will comply, Sophia, for the good of our legacy." I felt my stomach twist. This wasn't pressure. This wasn't suggestion. This was financial blackmail dressed in elegance. Sophia's voice cracked as she whispered, "I knew she wanted control. I didn't know she'd threaten his future to get it." I sat beside her on the edge of the bed, the weight of the moment settling over both of us. Because this wasn't just about a wedding anymore. This was a glimpse into the kind of control she'd face for years, unless someone stopped it today. And unbeknownst to her, Adrian had already heard the message to Ed Zuwal. While his mother tried to orchestrate legacy, he was preparing to confront her. Because nothing exposes a family's true values faster than the moment someone chooses love over tradition. And this family, this legacy, was about to face a truth they could no longer hide behind marble walls and old money etiquette. By the time the reception reached its peak, the hotel felt like a stage polished for a very specific audience. The controller's peers' crystal glasses chimed in careful rhythm. The band played a curated set list she had personally approved, and conversations floated through the room full of names that sounded like they belonged on charity gala plaques, not family toasts. From the outside, everything looked flawless. From the inside, it felt like a performance with one unwilling actress. Sophia smiled when she needed to, posed when asked, thanked guests with sincere warmth. But every time her eyes drifted toward Adrian's mother, her expression tightened almost imperceptibly, like she was bracing for the next correction. The controller glided between tables like a head of state, accepting compliments on the venue, the food, the history. Guests kept saying the same thing. "You've outdone yourself again." Not, "They have outdone themselves." She had at one point during dinner, I watched her lean toward a distant cousin and nod in Sophia's direction. "She's not accustomed to our standards yet," she said quietly, but not quietly enough. "She adjusts." The cousin offered a sympathetic smile that told me everything I needed to know. They'd seen this pattern before. Near the end of the evening, as the couple prepared for their final dance, the controller slipped away from the ballroom. I noticed because I've learned to track the movements of people who make trouble in elegant ways. They rarely storm, they disappear. A few minutes later, a member of the front desk team approached me, looking uneasy. "Emily, I thought you should know. She's been asking about the honeymoon suite again. She told us she may rest there tonight to watch over them." I felt that now familiar cold sensation at the base of my neck. I took the service elevator up to the honeymoon floor. The hallway was dim and quiet, carpet swallowing the sound of my steps. When I reached the suite, I saw something that looked almost surreal, the door slightly ajar, a soft wedge of golden light spilling into the corridor. I pushed it open carefully. She was inside, not standing, not inspecting. Sleeping on the honeymoon suite sofa, her shoes were neatly placed beside the couch, her legs tucked under a cashmere blanket. The monogram that matched her luggage stitched in the corner. On the coffee table, a half-empty teacup and a folder of paper-stressed documents, property notes, old photographs of family events held at the same hotel. I stood there for a moment, watching the scene, and it felt profoundly wrong. This room was meant to be the first safe space of a new marriage. Instead, it looked like an extension of her private study. I didn't wake her. I stepped back into the hall and called the night manager. "I need the access log for this suite," I said. My voice surprised even Metcalm for how furious I felt. The entries came through within minutes. Her key had opened the door 3 times since dinner. Once before the couple's first dance, once during toasts, once just 15 minutes ago, all while Sophia and Adrian were downstairs entertaining guests. All while she knew exactly where they were. This wasn't protection. This was occupation. As I was piecing this together, another staff member joined us, phone in hand. "There's something else," he said quietly. "She asked me earlier to store these somewhere safe, but I listened before I handed them over." He passed me the device. More voice messages. Her voice again, low and precise. "If you defy the family order, you will not receive what is meant for you. I will not watch decades of work fall apart because you have decided you're in love with someone who doesn't understand where she married into." In another message, even colder, the honeymoon suite is not simply a room. It is part of a chain of events that define legacy. Don't make me reconsider your place in it. It took everything in me not to. March straight back into that room and wake her with every ounce of truth she'd tried to suffocate under the blanket of tradition. Instead, I did what I always do. I gathered evidence. I had the logs, I had the messages, I had eyewitness accounts from staff who watched her move her belongings into the suite without consent. All that was left was whether Adrian would choose to see it. When I returned to the ballroom, the couple had just finished their final dance. Guests circled them, applauding, capturing photos and videos that made the night look like a dream. But dreams don't usually come with legal documents stacked in a honeymoon room and inheritance threats layered into voice memos. I caught Adrian by the edge of the dance floor and asked if I could speak to him alone. Sophia, sensing the urgency, followed. In a quiet corner near the back hallway, I laid it out. The bag in the suite, the sleeping figure on the sofa. The access log. The messages. Adrian listened without interrupting, eyes darkening with each new detail. When I played the voice memo, where she threatened to cut him out of the inheritance, his jaw clenched so hard I could see the muscle in his cheek twitch. He didn't say, "I can't believe this." He said, "Of course she did." There was no surprise in his voice. Only a sad kind of confirmation. Sophia looked between us, her face pale but steady. "What are we going to do?" she asked. Adrian took her hand. "We're going to end it," he said. "Not the wedding, not the night. The pattern." The controller had built her entire identity on the belief that legacy justified intrusion, that money justified threats. That tradition justified humiliation. But in a few minutes, she was about to learn what happens when the next generation decides the legacy isn't worth the cost. And this time, the confrontation wouldn't happen in a hallway or a quiet room or a private voicemail. It would happen exactly where she feared losing control the most, in front of everyone. When Adrian stepped back into the ballroom, something in his presence had changed. It wasn't loud or dramatic. It was the kind of shift you feel before you understand it. His shoulders were squared, his expression composed, but there was a current running beneath his calm that told me the confrontation was already inevitable. The controller spotted him first. She moved toward us with a smile polished enough to fool anyone who hadn't heard her messages or seen her sleeping in the honeymoon suite. "There you are," she said lightly. "I was just about to slip upstairs. There are traditions that need to be honored." That was it. That sentence snapped the last thread holding the evening together. Adrian didn't raise his voice. He simply said, "We need to talk." Her smile faltered. "Not completely just enough for me to see a crack form beneath the surface. Darling, whatever it is, we can discuss it later. Right now, the family is waiting for us." "No," he said, "they're going to hear this too." Conversations around the room began to quiet, like the reception was instinctively tuning itself to the moment. Guests glanced over, sensing tension as naturally as they sensed music. The controller straightened, trying to reassemble her composure. "Adrian," she whispered sharply, "not here." He pulled out his phone and pressed play. Her voice filled the reception, calm, cold, unmistakable. "If you don't follow tradition, I will reconsider the inheritance distribution. I refuse to see our family diminished. You will comply." For the good of our legacy, the ballroom froze. Every guest, every relative, every vendor stood still, faces slowly turning toward her. You could feel the air tighten, as if even the chandeliers were holding their breath. Color drained from her face. Not embarrassment. Exposure. "Someone must have altered that recording," she said quickly. "This is taken completely out of context." Ethan stepped forward. "And sleeping in our honeymoon suite, was that also taken out of context?" A ripple of shock moved through the crowd. A few people gasped. One aunt set down her champagne like it had suddenly become evidence. Sophia spoke next, her voice steady, despite everything she'd endured. "Your traditions are not an excuse to invade our home, our privacy, or our marriage." The controller opened her mouth, but no words came out. Her eyes darted toward the exits like she was searching for a way to escape the judgment pressing in from every direction. And then the hotel manager approached, maintaining the same professional tone he'd used all evening. "Ma'am, we need to speak with you about unauthorized entry to guest rooms. Please come with me." It was polite. It was firm. It was exactly the kind of consequence she never believed she'd face. "I will not be escorted out of my own family's event," she snapped. The silence that followed was sharp enough to cut. Adrian met her eyes. "This isn't your event, it never was, and you are not going near our suite again." For a moment, she looked genuinely startled, like a woman waking from a dream she'd authored and realizing she didn't control the ending after all. Then the humiliation hit. She turned away abruptly, gathering what remained of her dignity as security guided her from the ballroom. The doors closed behind her with a soft thud that felt far louder than the music that resumed moments later. I watched the couple breathe, again really breathe for the first time that night. Not because the problem was gone, but because the truth was finally out in the open, where it could no longer manipulate from the shadows. When I later walked the hallway to the honeymoon suite, the air felt clean, no misplaced belongings, no perfume lingering where it didn't belong, no legacy waiting inside to be inspected. Just a room meant for two people who had finally reclaimed their own story. Sophia leaned into Adrian as they entered, and he wrapped an arm around her, not in apology, not in fear, but in a shared understanding that their marriage had already survived its first impossible test. And as I walked back toward the elevator, I couldn't shake the thought that echoed through every decision the controller had made. Tradition is supposed to protect a family, not imprison it. Which leaves only one question lingering in the aftermath of everything she tried to control. When tradition becomes a tool for power, how do you protect your new family from the old one? There's a moment after every wedding, usually when the last guest has drifted away and the music fades into a distant echo, when the truth of the entire event comes into focus. Not the decorations, not the speeches, not the photos everyone will post online. The truth underneath. The one that doesn't fit neatly into the highlight reel. Tonight, that truth was unmistakable. Across 4 different families, 4 different states, and for very different weddings. I watched a pattern repeat itself with chilling precision. A mother-in-law so consumed by status, legacy, money, or control that she believed the honeymoon suite, the most intimate threshold of a marriage, belonged to her too. Each of these women justified their intrusion with a different mask. One called it generosity, one called it reputation, one called it financial responsibility, one called it tradition. But in the end, they weren't protecting anything, they were claiming territory. And every time, the price wasn't measured in invoices or budgets or upgrades. It was measured in the breath a bride loses when she realizes she's no longer fighting for aesthetics. She's fighting for her own space, her new marriage, her right to exist without someone else's shadow crossing her threshold. What stays with me most isn't the chaos or the conflict, it's the moment after. The moment when a couple finally reclaims what should have been theirs from the beginning. When a groom stands where he never dared stand before. When a bride sees that the person beside her understands exactly what they're up against. These weddings didn't fall apart. They cracked open, and inside those cracks, truth poured out. As I walk through each honeymoon corridor tonight, the Charleston suite, the Lake Tahoe retreat, the Miami penthouse, the historic New York hotel, realize that boundaries aren't broken loudly. They're broken quietly by people who believe the rules don't apply to them. But boundaries can be rebuilt, and when they are, they create marriages stronger than any performance of perfection. So, after witnessing 4 nights that should have been private but were nearly stolen, one question lingers in the quiet space these families left behind. Which mother-in-law crossed the boundary the hardest? And why do you think she believed she had the right to?